Hello. Didn't see you there. Um, uh, just getting my hands ready to look good on camera. What's manly? I'm using a sanding stick. It's manly pursuits. I'll just go and watch the film. Hey everyone, it's Fox from modelmakingguru.com here, and welcome back to part 2 of our build of the 1/60th scale no grade Strike Gundam. Yes, finally back to this. If you've been following me on my Facebook page, you'll know that up until pretty much this moment I've been working on the 1/60 scale master grade unicorn, or punicorn as I like to call it. Kind of got bored. Well, not really bored, but my mojo went and my motivation flagged. And the one thing I've learned over the years is it's always good to have more than one project on the go at any one time, because stuff is drying and waiting for things to happen, so you've got to have something to do. But more importantly, if you start to flag on a project, if you crack on with it and keep going, you'll just kind of get to resent it, and then you won't do your best work. So I took my usual advice. I realised I was sitting there going, so many things to do, and I've got to do all the weapons, and after you've painted and decaled and primed 6 Gatling guns. So I thought, no, it's going to go back in the box. I'll come back to it some other time. So the mobile suit's done. It's just everything else. So that's back in the box. Cracking on with this. Where are we up to today? Well, this is the first real part of building the thing. So everything's been taken off the sprue. Everything's been denubbed, sanded down, and cleaned up. Today we're going to start with the priming. And it's going to be the first time I'm going to use a new product. Not a new product. Well, it is a new product, sort of. For me, anyway. And I have to thank Tony McPony over at Helgan35. Go to YouTube, his channel's brilliant. Helgan3, it's there. I'll just put it here. He suggested I use this, the Ultimate Primer. Water-based acrylic polyurethane self-leveling surface primer. Blick. So, we're going to try using this. I've done some of the priming already, and I have learned some things about this. It's quite interesting. But I'm going to be doing the old Industrial Light and Magic style of, instead of pre-shading after priming, I'm just going to prime it all black and then build up the colour on top. Now, there is a reason for this on this particular kit, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because, you know, you don't care, don't need to know. But if you follow me on my Facebook, most of my Facebook, you'll know I'm out of a job. I have no job. I am a free man. But don't worry, don't panic. I have a plan, and it might not work, but it might work. My plan is to do this stuff. Build kits, sell them, and hopefully, if I'm lucky, I can try and make some money that way, and that'll be my income then. I no longer have to submit to a shirt and tie and the corporate politics and all that nonsense. It might not work, but we'll find out. It's one of those things. I got to a point in my life where I thought, you know what, let's just go and see if we can grab that dream. See if we can grab it. If it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, well, you know, at least I've tried. So the one thing I've learned in my almost 6 years of life is, if you see an opportunity, take it. If it doesn't work, then you've learned something, move on. So I'm going to be focusing on some builds, not all builds, but on some builds I'm going to focus on efficiency. There'll still be builds where I spend 150 hours painting, weathering, priming, pre-shading. There'll still be some builds I do to put in my display cabinet. There'll still be some builds I do for other people, like the Zaku I'm doing for Mig Jimenez, or builds I'll do for, say, E-models and things like that, where I'll put my all into them. But there'll also be builds where I'm just building them just to sell them. Because I want to build them, obviously. It's because I want to build a particular kit, but I'm going to be looking to sell it. So I'm going to try and become more efficient in some of the processes. So on this one, because it's basically a giant no-grade, I could spend a while doing all the pre-shading and everything else, but I don't want to spend 120, 130 hours on a kit that I'm not going to sell for 130 hours worth of work. So there's going to be some efficiencies, some speeding up of processes. And doing this as an overall black coat and then putting the paint on top, it's an alternative way of doing pre-shading instead of doing all the panel lines. It's just the way you build the paint up on top. So it's still going to look fantastic, and these kind of builds I'm going to do, say most of the stuff I'm going to build I'm going to sell. So if you like what you see as I'm building them, go ahead, because it'll go on eBay once it's finished. They'll still look hopefully as good as I can make them look anyway. I'll still give it my absolute all. I'll put my passion into the build. It's just there may be some more efficient processes. So I'm also going to be showing that, because a lot of the processes in model making, especially if you watch my skill level 4, skill level 5 films, you can look at them and think, oh my God, I'm never going to learn all that. If you're a beginner or you're just starting out, there's that word again, beginner. But sometimes there are more efficient ways of doing things that aren't quite as labour intensive or quite as craftsman kind of in their style. So I'm going to also take the advantage of that and show some of these processes. So we're going to be using this. We're also going to use, when it gets to the painting stage, something else Tony McPony. He's not really called Tony McPony, obviously Tony Fairclough, but hey, he's now Tony McPony in my brain. He also put me onto these Mr. Metal Colour paints, which you can't read because they're dead shiny, from Gunze Sangyo or Mr. Hobby or Krios. I'm not really sure because they're kind of labelled as all the different ones, so I never know which one it is. So yeah, Mr. Metal Colour. They do a few. They do like Mr. Colour, which is the basic paints, and some of those are metallics, but they're just like acrylic metallics. These are Mr. Metal Colour, which are lacquer based, I think, and buffable. So we'll show that. And also, they do a Mr. Metal Colour Super. I think it's called Mr. Metal Colour Super or something like that. And they're not buffable, but they're just really metallics. But I'm going to be using these. These are buffable. So we'll go into that when we get to do the inner frame. We'll explain those and what I mean by buffable mechanics. I wouldn't want to buff a mechanic. Oh, matron, I say. How very gauche. Metallics. Buffable metallics. So let's crack on. Let me shut the hell up. Yes, Tony says this is the dog's bollocks. So we're going to give this a try. I have tried it and it kind of is. And for those of you outside the UK, the dog's bollocks means it's really, really good. So we'll go and get the airbrush ready. And we'll crack on with priming all of these. To the airbrush. Okay, right, so we're going to be using the Ultimate Primer. This is water-based, as I said. It doesn't need to be thinned. You can do it straight from the bottle, which is one advantage of this stuff. I've used a number of different primers over the years. I've used, up to now, my favourite was Tamiya's Rattle Can Primer, because it doesn't take long to stick on. You can do one coat, it's on there, it's tough as nails, and it's great. However, you do have to do it outdoors because it's a rattle can, and it's getting to it's like October now, and I know at this time of year my ability to go outside and use rattle cans of anything is minimal. And like I said, obviously I'm looking at being efficient and making as many kits as I can. I can't be doing that, so I've started to use airbrush primers. I've used the Ammo of MIG primer, that's really, really good. And I'm just starting to use this stuff. The advantage of this stuff is it comes in, well, you can get it in these big 120ml bottles, and that will last you ages. It comes in various colours. There's a rust colour, white, black, and it's water-based, which means it's easy to clean out, and you don't need to thin it. Now, it says polyurethane, and if you've used Vallejo's primers before, you'll know they kind of suck ass. You put them on, they self-level nicely, but they don't grip to anything. They come off. You can leave them for days and they just come off. This stuff doesn't, so don't let the word polyurethane put you off. This video, by the way, it's not sponsored by these guys. I'm not being paid. This isn't product placement. I'm just telling you what I'm using. So yeah, we're going to use this. I'm going to be using my Iwata Revolution 5mm airbrush. Now, whenever you watch any YouTube or anything else, or from the manufacturers themselves, they say you've got to use at least a 0.4mm airbrush. No, you don't. I've actually successfully used it through my 0.35mm Neo, Iwata Neo, the trigger grip one. And I would be using that now, apart from like a spoon, I dinged the needle and bent the end, so I'm waiting for a new needle to turn up. So don't be put off by the fact it says you have to use a 0.4 or bigger needle. I've used it on a 0.35. If you've got a 0.2mm airbrush, it's probably not going to work because it's a bit too thick for that. But 0.35 Neos, not a problem. Clean your airbrush out with normal airbrush cleaner, thinners, acrylic thinners, no problem at all. So, now this is a return to a button grip for me, so I might be a bit shonky on this. I'm used to my trigger grip now. So, as with all Ultimate products, oh, and one other thing as well, if you've used Badger Steinal Res, it's the same stuff. It's not an industry secret. It actually says, made and bottled by Badger Airbrush Company in the US. It's the UK version of Badger's Steinal Res. It's just relabeled as Ultimates with the agreement they've got with Badger. I think that's a really smart move on Paul's part there from UMP. Absolute genius move, because this is, Steinal Res is one of the best airbrush primers you can get, and this is basically Steinhauer Res. So if you've used it, you know it kicks ass. So, as with all these products, give it all the shaking in the world. Now, I don't actually know if this airbrush works. I gave this to my friend Busby, he of the Heavy Arms build, when I got my Neo, my Trigger Grip Neo. And I kind of forgot to clean it out. And he's had it for like about 3 months, and I got it back last night, and I'm like, oh, there's so much primer in there from the last time he used it that it's just made of gunk and concrete. It took me about 5 minutes to get the lid off here. It was concreted in. So I can't guarantee this will work. This might just be screwed and I don't know it. So we're giving it a good shake. Airbrush. Primer. Again, you can use it neat. Now I'm putting a lot in here because I've got a lot of pieces to do. That's going to last me quite a while. Dead simple. Now, I'm not going to be wearing a mask for this one part, but as soon as I finish filming this, I'm going to do the rest of the parts and I will be wearing a mask. I'm using my spray booth. Always wear a mask. As I've always said, if you're spraying anything, doesn't matter if it's water-based, I don't care. Always wear a mask. Now, in terms of masks, what do I mean? I don't mean a little paper thing you get from B&Q. That's a dust mask that protects you from dust. I mean a proper mask. This is a 3M respirator that I got from, I can't remember where I got it from. This is a 3M respirator. You want a mask that protects you from not just particulates, so like sawdust or plaster dust. You want something that protects you from vapours and chemicals. So all these things that you use, I mean this is water-based and it's polyurethane, so it's not as harmful as say those Mr. Metal Colour lacquer paints. But you breathe this stuff in long enough, there'll be nasty consequences. Any modelling product that you're spraying. So yeah, so always wear a mask. So let's turn everything on. Get the extractor on. Airbrush on. Now let me show you how easy this is. Are you ready? Some primers, like the Vallejo stuff, you have to build up in layers and be really careful about your application. No, this will just go like this. I'm not being especially careful. I'm not being especially thoughtful. I'm just spraying it on. And using a button airbrush is really weird after a few months of using a trigger. This airbrush isn't working exactly brilliantly, but it'll do for the moment. And you can see here, I'm not being particularly delicate. I'm not building it up in multiple layers. I'm pretty much slapping this stuff on. Now this stuff is good because, like Pledge multi-surface wax, it self-levels really nicely. Now you'll note I'm spraying inside the part here. I don't need to because you're never going to see that, but I want to protect the plastic from anything I might put on it later. And if I use some, say, thinned washes and they seep inside the part through a little gap and there's no primer on there, as you know from my other videos, the plastic could be damaged by the thinners in those products. So it's always worth taking the time to prime everything, even the stuff you're never ever going to see. And that'll do it. That is that part primed. Now it's shiny now. If it's a bit cold or a bit humid, I know it's hard to see because it's black in a dark booth. If it's a bit cold or humid, you might see there a little bit of orange peel. That will go away. If you think you've put on too much, like I said before, it will self-level beautifully. So what we'll do is we'll give it 10 or 15 minutes. We'll see what that looks like when we come back. And we're back. Right, okay, this has had about half an hour now to dry, and as you can see it's finger dry. You want to leave it for about 24 hours in total, just to make sure it fully cures. But I'll do a bit of a scratch test, and as you can see, I've already done a scratch test because I filmed this about 13 times because I keep flubbing my lines. Because I am special. So yeah, it's had about half an hour. Off camera just now, I did all the parts for both legs. Yesterday, I did all the rest of the parts for this kit. And in total, it's probably taken me about 2.5 to 3 hours to do all the priming. And it's about 100 and something parts. I've used all my skewer sticks. I had to make a few extras, so I probably got about 110 parts, something like that. I'm not sure how many parts, but they're all quite big. So it seems like it took a long time, but compared to actually priming all the parts and then going back and doing pre-shading with a separate colour, like you've seen me do in other builds, it's a lot faster, it's a lot more efficient. And like I said before, for some builds I'm going to use efficiency where the results are just as good, but I'm not taking as long to get those results. So, you know, if you don't want to spend hours and hours and hours priming and pre-shading, this might be a method, because this is both the primer coat and the pre-shade coat all in one, because I've used a black. Now, there are some disadvantages, and I'll cover that in a second. But like I say, this has had about half an hour. You can see it is beautifully smooth. You've still maintained all the details, like that little bit there. And you saw how I just slapped it on. I didn't think, and I didn't care. I wasn't building up in soft layers. Like I said a little bit about the Vallejo primer, it's so fussy. It can work, but you have to get it on exactly right. Sometimes use several layers. You have to sometimes thin it and get the ratio between thinner and primer exactly right, otherwise it never cures, and it's just not worth it. I'll never use Vallejo's primer again. They're terrible. Sorry, Vallejo. But this stuff, yeah, this is sweet. And as I say, it's had about half an hour. Let's do a scratch test. I know you can see I've already done one. Bit of a stick, bit of pressure. Okay, yeah, it's scratching off, but it's fighting. It's fighting me. I'm not getting it all off, and that's after half an hour. If you leave that for 24 hours, you'll be able to throw this piece around quite happily, and it won't scratch off. Like I said, I did a test with some tape. After 24 hours, if I put masking tape on here and then rip it off, it won't take the primer with it. Now, like you saw, I did do a test on this plastic lid where it came off, but that had about, I don't know, it was about 24 hours, but this is super shiny plastic with no grip. So like I said earlier, if you're going to be priming, if it's just a normal model part like this, you're fine, just prime it, it'll be fine. If it is really, really shiny for any reason, like for example it was a metal part or something like that, or just really, really shiny, or you're not sure, just give it a very light sand just to keep the surface, and then you have no problems. But this is just bare plastic, and as you can see, it's coming off in a little bit, but it's only had half an hour. So by the time that's had 24 hours, that'll be kick ass. So if you're in the UK and you're looking for a good primer and you can't get Steinauer Res, don't worry, just get Ultimate. It's exactly the same product. If you've been trying different primers or you're looking for a good primer, give this a go. Now, I mentioned some disadvantages about spraying a primer and base coat, a primer and pre-shade coat all in one like this. Yeah, there is one disadvantage. Obviously, when you do a pre-shade coat, and if you've watched my other video, you know, right, for a pre-shade coat, I might spray a black. I'll do a base coat for the primer, like white or grey. Then I'll spray a dark or black colour around some of the areas I want to have a shadow, like around these little holes here, around that thing in the middle, around the edges. Then you go over with your colours and you just make it, do it in such a way that you can still just see this light shadow from the pre-shading. That does allow you to control where shadows go. When you do it this way, you have a little less control. So obviously the whole thing's black. If I'm spraying this white, I'd put more white paint around the middle here to make it brighter and leave less around the edges. So you get the same effect. It's maybe a little bit more work in that respect. Also, if you're doing a light colour, you may find that colour comes out darker. So for example, if I was painting this yellow, if I did it over a white primer coat, then after a couple of coats of yellow it would look yellow. Over a black primer coat it's going to look kind of greeny yellow, and I'm going to have to do a bit more work to build up that colour to a bright yellow. So there are some disadvantages because most paints aren't solid, they're translucent. You can sort of see through them, so the underneath colour will shine through. So the black primer will have an effect on the colour you paint on top. You may have to add a bit more to get the vibrancy you want. But it's still a lot less work. Even though it's a bit more effort there, it's still a lot less work than pre-shading everything and priming everything. So be aware of that. I'll obviously have that issue when I come to do the V-fin and the yellow and red parts. They may look a bit darker, but I'll just have to, think a bit more. But that's fine. So these are all primed. Everything's now primed. I've got to leave these for 24 hours or for the rest of the 24 hours to do. So when we come back, we will either crack on with the main red, blue and white painting, or we will crack on with the metallics for the inner frame. I've got to do some tests because I haven't used those Mr. Metal colours yet. So I've got to do some tests on some spare plastic. That airbrush I used, the Revolution, is a bit rubbish. It's a bit knackered. It might work. One other thing as well, you won't have seen on video, but because it's a bit of a shonky airbrush, when I was spraying it, every now and then it will go and spray out some blobs of paint. I cleaned it out. There's nothing in there, but it's just a bit rubbish because it's old and I've used it for more than 5 minutes, so it's completely knackered. But the good thing is, as soon as that splob appeared, I just sprayed some more primer over it because it's all wet. It's self-leveled, so you can't see any of that. So if you've got a bit of a splutty airbrush, again, this primer is really good for that, because as long as it's just gone on and you cover it with more wet primer, it'll level out. So yeah, I'll do some tests on the Mr. Metal colours before I film that, and I'll see how it goes. I'm hoping it all works. If it doesn't, I may have to backtrack and just use my normal methods for the metallic inner frame parts. Not sure yet, but anyway. So let me go and leave these to dry for a while, and when we come back, we'll either do some of the base colours or the Mr. Metals. Back in a moment.